Ford, Rasho Nesterovic, and the 17th pick in tomorrow's NBA draft. Again, this all is pending a physical. There you look at the trade. O'Neal going to the Raptors. The Pacers getting the two players back and the 17th pick. NBA draft Thursday, 7 Eastern on ESPN. To talk about this trade, we bring in ESPN The Magazine's Chris Broussard, who joins us. Chris, what was the motivation for both sides to make this move?
Well, for Toronto, it really signifies a sea change in the way they've played. You know, they've always been, since Brian Colangelo has been there, kind of a wide-open team, spread the floor, a lot of perimeter play. Now they're going to be more of a physical half-court team. When you talk about Jermaine O'Neal at the center, Chris Bosh at the forward, Andrea Bargnani, who still got a lot of potential, he'll be backing up the 4 and 5 spot, can even play some of the 3 spots. So that's basically 3 7-footers they could put on the front line. That's a style Sam Mitchell likes. And then really they wanted to get rid of TJ Ford because they have Jose Calderon, who really played at an all-star level when Ford was out last year. So they looked like they improved themselves quite a bit. For Indiana, they weren't going anywhere with Jermaine O'Neal. He's been hurt, missed most of, last few seasons, and they've really been able to play well without him. Their record's been close to the same without him.
It is Sportsfeld Storytime. We are turning the clock back to 2007. The Toronto Raptors, last time we spoke, had just dropped a series to the New Jersey Nets. A errant entry pass from Jose Calderon, who coming off an injury, snatched up by prime Richard Jefferson. Vince Carter and the Nets move on. They would go a little deeper than the Raptors, of course. They beat them. They would go all the way, not just one year longer than the Cavs, would snuff them out. For the Raptors, however, the very next year, they would continue on their winning ways, 41-41. Listen, back in the day, things were different. You went 500, you finished second in your division, and you easily made the playoffs in 2008. That's how the East worked in 2008. The Celtics went 66-16. The Raptors, 41-41. Some small storylines, of course. The Celtics, that is the Big Three year. That is the year that those Celtics ended up teaming that team together. Not a huge amount of changes for the Raptors as a team. Carlos Delfino. Remember Carlos Delfino?
I do remember. I like Carlos Delfino a lot. I think it's funny, sorry, just to get into the offseason a little bit. It's funny how offseason impressions have changed as Raptor fans in the last decade. How the big signing that everyone was like, yes, in this offseason was Jason Kapono.
Oh, man, I remember exactly where I was. They signed him the moment free agency opened. They signed him.
Yeah, we were like, that's exactly what we need. And it's a good thing. But how now, our expectations of free agent signings are a little different.
Yeah, Jason Kapono, great pick. He would go on to shoot 48% from 3 that year.
He was Jason Kapono is a perfect late 2000s NBA player in that he was good at literally only one thing. But that was enough to give him a full career.
What a world. Jason Kapono, I mentioned, shoots 48.3% on 1.5 attempts per game. Unheard of percentages. And he shoots the ball twice a game. Come on.
And he was he made real money and had a real career off that.
Unbelievable. Carlos Delfino, Jamario Moon. Remember Jamario Moon?
I do remember Jamario Moon. One of the more frustrating Raptors of all time. He was very emblematic of this era of the Raptors of if he could just play better defense and shoot the ball better and be better at dribbling, he could be something.
Yes.
But, he won a dunk contest though.
To your point about Kapono, Jamario Moon could jump. That was his he could really, really jump was his singular skill that got him 75 starts. Holy Christ. So anyway, 41-41. They go into a series against the Orlando Magic and prime Dwight Howard. It's a good Magic team. They really were sort of ahead of their time. With Howard, Rashard Lewis, Hato Turkoglu, Jameer Nelson, Mo Evans, Keon Dooling, Keith Bogans. They basically just surrounded Howard with shooters. It would work out a few years later, but I was at Game 4 of this series, I believe, if I'm looking at the time. Yes, it was a 3 p.m. start. I went to this game absolutely irate that they would not foul Dwight Howard more. Dwight went 1 for 6.
That's right. I do remember that.
From the line, and it was like clear that he didn't want to be there, and they wouldn't hack at Dwight. They ended up winning by 12. One of those ones where you go and you get drunk and you scream your head off, and then it's 5:30 and you're outside the stadium and you're like, oh, now I'm really tired.
My memory from this series is I was in Montreal in residence in my first year of university while this series was going on. And I remember I had one friend in my residence who was a Raptors fan because she was from Scarborough, I think. Mm-hmm. And we were watching, it was game 2 was the one that really sort of was my big memory because, at the time with all the Toronto teams being not good this time and living in Montreal, people who knew me and I lived in residence with and my friends didn't really get to see sports fan Jake. But game 2 was a 1-point loss in Orlando for the Raptors. And I remember people being like, what happened to you for the last little bit? Because they'd never seen yelling sports fan Jake before. And I was like, it's complicated. Don't worry about it. But I'll always remember that game as it was very fun. It was a very tense, tight game of well, if they can win this, then maybe they can come back, which obviously they could not and did not. But it was a funny moment that always kind of stuck with me.
It's a 1-possession lead. Quickly over the timeline is Calderon. Calderon on the drive. Delfino. Got it. 9.6 seconds remaining.
Go for the steal. Quick foul here.
Chuck Swirsky, Leo Rums, and Ned Burke on the score. Parker. Calderon. 6 seconds remaining. Bosh. From the lead. Rimming. No. Rebound. Magic. Ball game over.
You got to give them credit. They do sort of go for it the next year.
Man.
Sean Marion and Jermaine O'Neal are your 2 big additions. I remember being 100% convinced Jermaine O'Neal was going to be the answer. I went to the home opener that year because I wanted to see Jermaine O'Neal. But it turns out having Jermaine O'Neal and Chris Bosh and Andrea Bargnani on the floor at the same time, not exactly what you're looking for in terms of an offense that can ever score ever. And they were also bad defensively. How's that possible?
No, they were so bad. I will give Brian Colangelo very small amount of credit. He at least wasn't afraid to throw random things at the wall and see what stuck. You have the Jermaine O'Neal experiment this season.
Did not last very long.
You obviously have the famous Hito Turkoglu experiment, I believe the season after. And it really did seem like it's a real Toronto tragedy is that the Raptors and Maple Leafs could never quite figure out how to build around their universe stars. Your Chris Bosh's, your Matt Sundins, all.
Your 2008-2009 is a really interesting list of transactions. In July, it's TJ Ford and Roy Hibbert, by the way, and Ratko Nesterovic to the Pacers for Jermaine O'Neal. And then in February of that year, Jamario Moon, Jermaine O'Neal, and a pick to Miami for Sean Marion and Marcus Banks. So Jermaine O'Neal does not last very long with your Toronto Raptors, which is sort of interesting. All that is to say, it ends the 2009 draft. 9th overall pick is DeMar DeRozan, and we go from one era of the Raptors quietly to another. As I can't believe that's the only amount of time that Jermaine O'Neal played on this team.
Sean Marion's a real trivia answer in his career playing in Toronto.
They traded for Jermaine O'Neal and played him 40 times and then traded him. That
is quite can you imagine that happening today?
Unbelievable.
Imagine a team just cutting bait, not saying it was even necessarily the wrong move, but just a team cutting bait that quickly today on a massive deal like that would be
unheard of.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Basically trading him as soon as you possibly can. But it didn't work. They also would fire Sam Mitchell 17 games into this season and bring in Jay Triano as your new Raptors head coach. 25 and 40 Jay Triano would go the rest of the way. This team obviously at 33 and 49, even with the brutal state of that Eastern Conference, they do not make the playoffs. They are 4th in the division behind the Nets and the Sixers, who are 500, and the Celtics, who once again 62 and 20 And of course, the Cavs, 66 and 16, as LeBron really came into his own. This was also the year the Magic went all the way to the finals. The year after the Raptors lose to the Magic go all the way. So you were looking at, a fairly decent little team that the Raptors lost to the year before.
Yeah. And, I always remember the Sam Mitchell firing from that season. Those three, they lost 3 in a row, all by like 15 plus. It's the December 2nd game against Denver. They lost 132-93. And they were only 8-9 at that point. It was like maybe the writing is on the wall for this one. A weird season, very weird season. And then the next year, as you point out, with DeMar quietly turning the page, there's a game. I'm going to try and find it. It's my lasting memory of this season. I remember Bosh was hurt for the last few games this season.
Right, and they almost accidentally made the playoffs.
Yeah, April 4th against Golden State. The Raptors are 38-37 going into this game. They would miss the playoffs by 1 game. 38-37 going into this game. They lose by 1 point to the Warriors at home. Bosh has a wide open layup, and I believe the ball went off his hands and out of bounds.
Yes.
And they would lose the next 4 after that game and then win the final 2 and miss the playoffs in 1 game. I'll always remember that ball going off Bosh's hands because it was both a crushing way to lose, but also there was the elephant in the room of, was that the last time we saw Chris Bosh?
Everyone standing.
He makes it. So he makes it. The Warriors just have to get the ball inbounded.
Throw it way down. Oh, my word.
It's stolen. Bosh misses. The Warriors win.
Throw the ball down at half court. I cannot believe they inbounded it in front of the Toronto basket.
Don Nelson gets win number 1,332, tying Lenny Wilkens for the most wins of all time.
They would turn the page in the decade, the beginning of 2009 season, just to sort of keep track of what this roster looks like. They trade Chris Humphries, Nathan Jawai, and Sean Marion to Dallas. Dallas trades Jerry Stackhouse to Memphis and Cash to the Magic and Devine George and Antoine Wright to the Raptors. The Grizzlies trade Greg Buckner to the Mavericks, and the Orlando Magic trade Hedo Turkoglu to the Raptors. They signed Jarrett Jack. They trade for Marco Bellinelli. They trade Carlos Delfino for Amir Johnson. They signed Pops Mensah-Bonsu, and they draft Ed Davis at the end of this season. So we start to see the beginning of the young guns, those Raptors, that Raptors rookie year. And then, that next season, 2010, Chris Bosh leaves for the Miami Heat, and they get their pick back that they had sent in the Marion deal, which turns into Jonas Valanciunas.
It's interesting to me how many of these guys were Colangelo guys.
Yes, isn't it?
Yeah. They feel like not because they achieved success after he left, but yeah.
In 2011, they draft Jonas 5th overall, and they hire Dwayne Casey at the beginning of the 2011 season, setting off the beginning of the Dwayne Casey era. The next year, not nearly as sort of influential. They end up drafting Terrence Ross that next year, and then we are basically into Masai / Kyle Lowry time shortly after. Well, the Rudy Gay trade happens in 2013, but I think 2017, or probably 2012, leading up to that Rudy Gay year is a nice sort of place to close the book on this era of the Raptors with Bosh leaving. You said it is a bit of a crime that they never really put the right pieces around Bosh, but it also speaks, you see him go off to Miami, right? And he is a clear number 3 on that team. It also, I think Bosh is a guy who has a really interesting history with this team now, because it's been 10 years, maybe 11 years since he was a Raptor. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh man, he's going to go down as an all-time great Raptor. But I don't know that he has. I don't know that history has remembered him as somebody that did much for the team, or as much as it felt like he was doing, other than sort of shepherd them through a year where they didn't really do anything, right? I mean, he was, listen, as a Raptor, He was a 6-time All-Star from 2005 to 2010. He was an All-Star every single year. Pardon me, 5-time All-Star. But and it would make the All-Star team every year the rest of his career after starting in 2005. But yeah, what is your sort of impression now on where Bosh goes in Raptors history, because I remember at the time thinking, oh, he's going to end up being a no doubt top 3 guy. But now DeMar and Kyle and, even Vince, is he top 5?
Yeah, I think that Bosh's legacy, such as it is with the Raptors, is complicated for all the reasons he said. I think also there was a real, I will say, unfair and incorrect sense around Bosh while he was in Toronto, that he came from the draft of LeBron and Wade, and who went 3 that year? Was it Melo who went 3rd that year?
Darko.
No, Darko went 2.
Oh, pardon me. Yeah. It was. So Bosh went 4th, didn't he?
Yeah.
So it was LeBron, Darko, Wade.
It was Carmelo.
Oh yeah, so that's right, Melo. That's right, Melo. Pardon me.
So because he was picked in between Melo and Wade, who immediately transformed their teams, Wade especially. I feel, and obviously LeBron, but LeBron's different.
Yes.
I feel like he was always looked at least in my circles of dumb people, it was kind of looked at as he was very similar to DeMar in a lot of ways. And that he was a great player, but he wasn't good enough to transform the franchise and be the guy to like bring a title or something to Toronto. And maybe that's true to some extent, although I think that's more of a function of the way the league worked at that time than anything to do with Chris Bosh. Because like Chris Bosh would be one of the best players in the world in today's NBA.
Yes, the part of his story that makes me so angry is he retires at 32, and it's like, you cannot name me a guy who would have been a better stretch 5 once the 3-point revolution took over. Like he would have been perfect from 2016 to 2019. He would have been perfect.
And so I think that's part of it, that he was always sort of viewed as like, well, maybe we should have got Wade in Toronto. And I think also the fact the team was shit for the most part. Other than that 1 year, which we're talking about here, the team was bad the entire time he was here.
They didn't win a playoff series.
And he never had that moment as a Raptor, which, like, to be fair, not many people have had as a Raptor. So I think that it's hard, other than Vince, I think there's a decent argument to be made that none of the top 5 Raptors of all time come from Bosh's era. It's all, the Kyle, DeMar, Kawhi era.
Yeah.
And that's fair because that's what happens when you win.
Yeah. In terms of win shares, Basketball Reference has him as number 2 all time for the Raptors with 61.8, behind Kyle, of course, just ahead of DeMar. But I certainly wouldn't argue that Chris Bosh is a better Raptor than DeMar DeRozan.
No, but I think your point is a good one in that because of all the noise and the team being so bad, I feel like how good Chris Bosh was as a Raptor is sort of overlooked.
Yeah. Absolutely.
He was so good.
And in that draft class, 3rd in win shares, even though Melo and LeBron are still playing, 3rd behind LeBron and Wade. So certainly not a disappointment, 4th overall, and ended up being a multiple-time NBA champion. That is where we close the book on the Chris Bosh, Brian Colangelo, Sam Mitchell era of the Toronto Raptors, a team that I think at the time, I thought I would remember more fondly than I did. I think at the time it was like, man, this is a really fun team with a lot of fun guys. And looking back at it, going through this with you, it was the Garbahosas and the bench guys and the names that you just sort of like were around for a year that I remember from this more so than even Bosh. And it's, I almost remember Mo Pete more, even though he's sort of a harken back to the generation before.
Yeah, I agree. That's what success brings, right? At the time, this was like they're getting back there. We all thought it was going to be more than it ended up being, I think.
Yeah. That is it for another month of Sportsfeld Storytime. We will be back in the next month with a whole new story, a whole new era to look back, make some jokes, and reminisce with some great footage. We hope you'll join us. As always, thank you so much for listening to Sportsfeld.